Welcome to Nutanix Sales Strategy and Competitive Differentiation. In this session, we're going to take a look at how to successfully approach a Nutanix sale. Upon completion of this session, you will have some insight into how our approach would put us in either a position of weakness or a position of strength. Understand the difference between the technical buyer and the economic buyer, and why we must target them differently to win the deal. Have awareness of other sensitive buyer personas and the strategy to engage them successfully. So I'm going to start by asking the question, what does Nutanix sell? And in a live session, typically I hear answers like hyperconverged infrastructure, enterprise cloud, software, nodes, clusters. And while all of that is true, I want you to get yourself in a different mindset. Everybody else that we compete against is out there pushing products. The unique differentiation that we bring to the table is that we fundamentally change the entire experience that customers have deploying, operating, and managing their data center environments. And if we're in that mindset, then we're not pitching products, but we're actually solving customer problems. And that's going to lead to a much more successful engagement with that customer. So the real key to our success is it's not about what we do or what we sell, but how we fundamentally change their experience. As you come to Nutanix, a lot of you will come from a world of selling infrastructure or selling boxes or selling servers or selling storage. And typically in that world, we're pitching a particular product. And that conversation is something like, look at my shiny new box. Here's all the latest speeds and feeds. And by the way, here's all the reasons why our speeds and feeds are better than everybody else's speeds and feeds. And at that point in time, you're going to go through and gather some requirements and go through a sizing exercise. And then you're going to go through and quote and hand over that quote over to the customer. And if you were successful at convincing them that your shiny new box is better than everybody else's shiny new box, then you'll get the PO in hand. And if you didn't, typically you're not going to. And so that's an oversimplification of selling infrastructure. But if you apply that kind of line of thinking to a Nutanix sale, you're not really going to be that successful. And prior to you guys coming in, we used to have a sales methodology called X Command. And X Command was really focused in on doing proper discovery questions, asking intelligent probing questions, and being able to really kind of flush out what the customer pain was, and then be able to talk intelligently about how our platform addresses that pain. What I see happening is that we go into a customer conversation with the intention of going out and figuring out pain. But customers often talk about the projects that they have. So instead of going through and fully discovering all of the pain that they have in their environment, we end up discovering requirements. And when we discover requirements, we see that as a short track to selling them something. And so we immediately go into a conversation where we're trying to fulfill those requirements. And so we're going to go through a sizing exercise and hand over a configuration. And along the way, we know we have a lot of other value that we can sell them. So we may try to upsell them on different licensing, or we may try to add different things in like Prism Pro or files or COM or whatever else may be relevant for what they're trying to accomplish. And so then we hand that over to the customer, and more often than not, we're going to get an objection. And the objection might be that your price is too high, I don't see any real differentiation compared to what we're doing today or compared to who else we're looking at. And the reason is because we actually didn't sell the value of Nutanix. All we did is fulfill their requirements. And what we didn't realize was they were also talking to a number of different other vendors who are also able to fulfill their requirements. And so we didn't differentiate ourselves, and we really didn't do anything different. In order to get out of that situation, we now have to continue to discount and try and become the lowest cost solution, or we have to go in there and completely trash the competition. And that may involve engaging the competitive team and coming in and talking about why vSAN can't do this or vSAN can't do that, or how we do something better than SimpliVity or HyperFlex. And at that point in time, the customer just sees us as expensive, and they don't see us as differentiated. They only see us as somebody that can fulfill the requirements. And so while we can sometimes pull those wins out, the probability of winning in that situation with that customer mindset is actually quite low. So if the vast majority of your deals look like this, then you're doing it wrong. So let's talk about a different approach and a better approach. So if we go back to the concept of not trying to fulfill requirements and really trying to address customer pain, then we have to make sure that we really focus in on doing full and proper discovery to identify all of that pain. And once all of that pain is on the table, then we want to be able to go through and position why Nutanix uniquely solves that pain, and then be able to lay appropriate traps and landmines on why the incumbent or the potential competition doesn't. We can further iterate on the how and expand on why we've designed something in a certain way, or why a particular feature or capability of the product is going to uniquely solve that customer's pain and why the competition isn't. And at that point in time, then we can go into gathering requirements for a particular project that they want to fulfill. And then we go through sizing, and we're going to hand over that sizing. And if they see us as different, if they see us as somebody that can uniquely solve their pain, and if they recognize that some of the other things that they're looking at really isn't going to solve that pain, then we're going to put ourselves in a situation where we have a much higher probability of getting that PO in hand. And we're going to lose less deals. Now, the problem with that approach is that approach doesn't take into account the different buyer personas that we're going to run into in a deal. And so for this particular exercise, I'm not going to get overly complicated with a whole pile of different buyer personas. So we're going to focus really in on two buyer personas. We're going to focus in on the emotional or technical buyer. And from a MedPIC perspective, this is the champion that you're building. And then we're going to focus in on a logical or economic buyer. And from a MedPIC perspective, this is your economic buyer. And so if we look at the emotional or technical buyer, so this buyer is the buyer that's actually operating the environment. He's the one that's going to feel the pain as a result of a poor purchasing decision that's being made. So he's the one that's directly impacted by what they choose. Now, most of the time, the technical buyer doesn't really care about cost. He's not responsible for managing budgets. He's not going to care about Gartner MQs. He's not going to care about messaging around vendor lock-in and those kind of things. He really just wants to know that by going with Nutanix, that we're going to make his life significantly easier. Now, if we look at the logical or economic buyer, he doesn't really feel that operational pain. He's not coming in evenings and weekends and missing his kids' soccer games and those kind of things. So trying to land a simplified operations message with him isn't necessarily going to resonate because he's not directly impacted by that decision. But this is the buyer persona that very much cares about cost and impacts to his budget. He's got long-term vendor relationships with the competitors that we're up against, and he needs a compelling reason to actually change vendors and go against those relationships. And then adding a new vendor into the mix also introduces risk into the business, and he very much cares about risk mitigation. And so as we look at these different buyer personas that we're talking to, we need to be very strategic about the conversations that we have with each of these different personas. Let's take a look at this process again. If we're having a conversation with that emotional or technical buyer, we're going to go through and discover all of his operational pain. As we're talking to him, he's going to talk about all of the boring minutiae and all of the very detailed administrative tasks and all the amount of time that it takes to go and actually run his environment. So we're going to get some great operational pain there. And Nutanix does a great job of making that pain disappear, effectively makes a lot of that invisible. So we have a very easy time being able to position why we uniquely solve that pain. We can then also expand on how we've taken some unique approaches compared to everybody else in the industry that allows us to actually make that pain go away. And at that point in time, we can have a conversation with that individual around the particular projects that they're looking at. We can hand over pricing. And at this point in time, we thought we did an amazing job. That technical buyer loves us, thinks that's a great solution. But we usually get a block at this point because that guy does not make the decision on the PO. That PO is typically going through a logical or economic buyer. And at this point in time, if we've never talked to that logical or economic buyer, and if he doesn't really know the unique value prop of Nutanix, we have the same problem that we previously discussed. He's going to see us as a vendor who can fulfill the requirements, and he's going to see us as more than likely a vendor who's more expensive than the other options that they're looking at. So we're always going to get this objection, why should we pay more? Because we've never actually landed a unique value prop with that logical or economic buyer. And that makes the PO very difficult to get. And this is what happens time and time again in a lot of the deals that we're in. So let's take a look at a slight modification of this approach. Again, say we're starting with the emotional technical buyer, we're going through discovering the operational pain, describing how we uniquely solve that. And at this point, your goal is to build a very, very solid champion that is going to drive additional Nutanix conversations within that customer environment. And that champion needs to get you in front of that logical economic buyer long before we ever hand over pricing. Now, when you get a chance to talk to that logical or economic buyer, you are now starting back at the beginning and you are going to do discovery again, but instead of identifying operational pain, you're going to be identifying business pain. And then we need to be able to position why we're uniquely solving that business pain and how what we've done with our approach can uniquely solve that in a way that others can't. And at that point in time, you now have the emotional and technical buyer and the logical or economic buyer in a position where they see Nutanix very differently. They see Nutanix as a company that can solve all of their problems and not just fulfill requirements. And if we go in and hand them pricing that might be slightly more than other competitors, they're in a completely different frame of mind to accept that and understand the value prop that we bring. And that's not going to put them in a very defensive mode. And it will not put us in a situation where we're going to have to go and further discount. And so if we do this correctly, we significantly increase the chances of getting a PO in hand. That concludes this session. Hopefully you have a much better understanding of what we need to do in terms of identifying different buyer personas and taking a different approach with them in order to put us in a position of strength and be able to win more deals. In the next session, we're going to cover doing proper discovery with each of these different buyer personas.